rifle setup, everybody on the internet has a video about this, right? But I basically disagree with the majority of them. So I think that rifle setup's really important, and the reason is that I see a lot of shooters that struggle to reach peaks that I think they could reach if they weren't fighting the gun and the way the gun is fighting against them, and they don't realize that because they've never had the experience at the peak and they don't understand how much the gun actually matters as it's set up. Hello. Just kind of muzzle to butt. Whether you're suppressed or not, do whatever you want to do. I run a suppressor when it's contextually applicable for what I'm doing. So for instance, out here, we don't want to be super loud today to bother certain people, so we put a suppressor on the gun. Like it's not because it's a performance enhancer or anything like that. It's just because it's convenient. Muzzle devices themselves. So this is an interesting one. So there's lots of different muzzle devices, and there's lots of different companies that are marketing that you need their muzzle device. And so what I find is flash hiders are going to be the least effective at doing basically anything to change how the gun shoots. Brakes are going to do the most. So a brake, and then we have a compensator, and like what's the difference? So a brake has the big ports on the side of it, the big chunks of metal that are missing that fire directional gas back towards the shooter to counteract what the rifle's trying to do, and it kind of keeps it pretty good and flat. Compensators have directional gas that is typically timeable. So think of your Sons of Liberty Knox muzzle devices, the Surefire War Comp, and things that have little ports that you can kind of time to make the gun do what you want it to do. I'm kind of, like, as a general rule, pretty anti-compensators. I don't like compensators for multiple reasons. I have data that indicates without question that certain compensators and certain rifles, you can change the precision of the gun. So I've seen guns go from being 1-minute guns to 2-minute guns based on the compensators and the directional gases. I'm not smart enough to know how that works. I just know that it does. The big one though is that I don't ever want the gun telling me what to do or like doing things without me being in control of that. So what we see very commonly is that like a dude will have one of those compensators and he's shooting, he really likes it, right? He's glad he bought it, kind of thing. And then we talk about structure behind the gun, we talk about stance, we talk about how we connect to the rifle, and then all of a sudden he'll be like, hey Mark, my gun's actually going down. Right? It's like, yeah, I know, because now you're mitigating the recoil and it's mitigating the recoil, and so we have too much mitigation of recoil, so you get what's actually called negative recoil, right? And I hate a gun that goes down because it's way easier to let a gun come back down than it is to pick the gun back up. So that's always kind of counteractive to what I'm trying to do. So I don't really like those as a general rule. Because I shoot with a lot of people a lot of time, I typically just use a flash hider because, like, you don't want to be that guy with the big break and everybody kind of hates you but they won't say it. I like just a flash hider, like for a training tool. Now if you see me at like a match, I'll certainly throw a break on it. Like I want every little piece that I can get. As far as flash hiders go, I'm pretty big on the open prong design. That doesn't mean I'm anti-closed, but the problem is that, like, you think about like an A2 birdcage flash hider with the closed tines, that can create directional gas, kind of like a byproduct of the compensator. It looks a lot like a compensator and it's forcing gas out the top of that. And so you can get a little bit of a push with those closed tine ones if you're not careful. So I generally like an open tine. Barrel length, I'm pretty... it's not that I'm non-negotiable on, it's just I think that a lot of people don't understand enough about what's possible with a rifle if you get the projectile going fast enough. There's a lot of concepts from the precision rifle world and the scope rifle world that you can utilize if you have a projectile that's going fast enough, such as like the point blank zero theory. Also, like the bullets, they're really tiny, right? So they do the thing that they do really good because they're going so fast. And if you kneecap that by choosing like a 7-inch barreled AR, you're basically kneecapping your ability to display the rifle's capacity at rifle distance. It's going to be very difficult for that thing to do what it needs to do. What the longer barrels typically do for me as well is they give me more rail space. I like full length rails. It gives me more options to put more accessories and things like that on the gun where I want them, not where I have to have them. It also gives me more surface area to mount different barricades from different positions without necessarily saying, hey, you have to put the barricade here because that's the only rail space you have. I like options, so I typically like longer barrels for that reason too. Also, I found that the longer barrels are a generally more pleasing shooting experience. They're just not as harsh on the shooter. They're not as harsh on the internal working parts and things like that. The barrel material is an interesting conversation though, because we have so many different options between like cold hammer forged chrome lined, button rifled stainless, and so on and so forth. And so like, which one do you get? I think that all depends on what kind of shooter you are. Typical rule of thumb is the cold hammer forged offerings are going to last longer than the stainless offerings. As far as before the rifling wears out, the groups start to open up, the velocities become wildly inconsistent, just weird stuff starts happening. We're destabilizing the bullets because we burn out the rifling. Cold hammer forged forged chrome lined barrels are going to last even longer than the cold hammer forged ones in and of themselves. The detriment is, because there's no free lunch, the more you start to layer thicknesses of chrome onto that rifling, you get more inconsistency involved in it that you can't really control to a certain degree. And so inherently, the stainless rifle barrels that have just been button rifled and we didn't really do anything but just clean them out after that are going to be inherently more precise just by manufacturing than a cold hammer forged variant where we're pounding this thing together and then we're going to layer some layers of chrome through it and whatnot. So if you want a barrel that's going to last you a really, really long time, cold hammer forged chrome line is going to be the way to go, but it's unreasonable to anticipate that that gun's going to be a precision rifle, right? It's just, that's not what you get. Precise enough for most people, certainly. If you do desire high precision, and that's the most important thing to you, kind of cut that barrel life in half and you get a more precise rifle, right? So this has a stainless steel standard barrel in it. There's no chrome lining, no hammer forging or anything like that, because I prioritize the precision of the system over the longevity of it. When it starts to get shot out, I'll just change the barrel out of it and it doesn't bother me all that much, right? And it's not like you choose a stainless steel barrel and all of a sudden you get 2,000 rounds of barrel life. Like, it's not that. Like, this thing's still going to go 10, 15,000 rounds, right? It's just not going to go 30 or 45,000 rounds. So depending on what you do with the gun kind of depends. Now, because I have guns that do have cold hammer forged chrome line barrels, but I don't do things with those guns that I asked this gun to do because it's just unreasonable. So this is the Sons of Liberty SPR barrel, the new one that they've come out with. I've been really happy with it. It's a really exciting time for barrels and ARs, because back in the day, like, it was pretty rare to like just get an AR-15 and be able to get a barrel and all of a sudden your gun shoots like a true 1 minute gun. Like 10 out of 10 groups are under 1 inch at 100 yards. These days, like, this is the easy button for precision. You know, again, if you're just doing general shooting, like the 50 yard and in, 100 yard and in, go fast stuff with carbines, I don't know that it's going to matter too much that you have a half-minute gun. Most people aren't missing because of that, but I think that if you are going to take a gun and say, I'm going to use this for the 100 yard and in, go fast stuff, maybe a little bit of distance, maybe a little bit of, like, I want to try to make a do-all gun where I just have one gun I can do most things with pretty well. The precision of the system is going to start to matter a pretty good bit once we get out to distance and those little variations extrapolate a little bit.
Do you care gas system?
Yes, I do care, but it's not enough to where I'm going to suggest one over the other necessarily. I've had carbine length systems that work great. I've had mid-length systems that work great. I've had, you know, intermediate rifle. I yield to the manufacturer and trust that they know what they're doing on that side of the house. I think that the porting size and properly gassing the port is significantly more important than the length of the system. And so I choose barrels like Sons of Liberty, Hodge Defense, Psionics, Ridgeline, like the dudes that actually have shooters associated with the company that know what they're looking for, and they're not necessarily so concerned about a rifle that will still function with rusty steel case ammo after you drag it through a pond or anything dumb like that, right? They're just worried about, like, is this a really shootable gun that exhibits high levels of performance, easier, and is reliable enough to call it reliable. What kind of rail you should get? I think that you can certainly make the argument that the rail doesn't necessarily need to be super rigid and super robust if you're doing this, right, or that. I've never met a very high level shooter that hasn't cared that his rail is not rigid. We all kind of end up here, so I think a great idea would be to go ahead and start with a pretty solid rail system that doesn't exhibit a lot of flex. That starts to matter when we put precision aiming instruments on the end of the gun, like laser systems and things like that. If this rail can move around a lot under load, we no longer have an aiming system. We have a hopeful system where we're pretty sure it might go over there. Also, when we get into the flexible rails, this is something that a lot of, I think, red dot carbine shooters don't even know exists. This is another concept from the precision rifle world. Conventional AR-15 systems, the rail attaches to the barrel nut, and the barrel nut attaches to the barrel flange, and the barrel flange is connected to the barrel extension, and that goes into the upper receiver. Typically, there's some sort of play or give with the tolerances of that receiver extension going into that upper receiver. That's why the vast majority of them, you give them a little grease, they just kind of drop in there, you tighten the nut, and you rock and roll. The problem is that if we take this rail that is free floated over the barrel and connected to the barrel attachment, and we apply pressure to it at any particular place, it's going to apply some leverage to the barrel nut, which is also then applying that same force into the barrel flange, which is applying that force into the receiver extension, right? And so we start to get point of impact shift based on the rail just not being rigid enough to not allow the flex, right? And so I've never seen a conventional AR-15 that does not exhibit point of impact shift due to input to the rail. What I try to do is get the most rigid, robust rail system I can to minimize that as best I can. Getting back into the receivers, so it's not that they don't matter. It's that you don't have to like lose sleep over it. So like what I tell dudes to do is just like go with a solid name brand, right? So like everybody knows that Glock, Smith & Wesson, these are solid name brands that have a track record of success in the pistol industry, right? Who has a solid track record of success in the rifle industry? BCM, Psionic, Sons of Liberty, Hodge. You can get into like the FN stuff. Like just standard sets of receivers are fine as long as they're formed properly to a pretty high quality control. The issue is when we get into like, hey, for Black Friday, I got this lower receiver for $6, you know, and then they're like on the drill press drilling the safety holes out because they can't get them to fit right, and then they write a letter to the customer service about how their gun don't work and it's their fault, you know. And don't go through that, man. You're going to end up buying the right thing anyway. So start out with it. As far as accoutrements on the rail and on the receiver, I think this is going to be pretty subjective, but I do have reasons for everything that I do. So on the longer guns, because I have the longer rail space, I like the longer lights because I get more run time without having to worry about changing batteries. On the shorter guns, I'll go to the shorter battery variants of like the Surefires and the mod lights and things like that. The light I kind of internalize as it's as important as the optic. One of the most common failure points of lights is the connections from tape switches. Therefore, if I'm going to run a tape switch, I want a redundancy feature built into it. So I like to run the light from the tape switch, but if that were to fail, get ripped out, torn, broken, whatever, I like a backup plan to be able to still actuate that thing. I'll roll that DS00 cap outboard so that if I do end up in some weird position where I'm underneath something supporting the gun, I can still access the light without having to come over and use delt muscles to hold the gun off the deck and do weird stuff like that. I put the switch where I put it, the same place I put bipods, the same place I put everything that I'm going to actually put my hand on. What I don't want to do is set switches, bipods, or controls to critical equipment in places that cause me to violate my connection of the gun to access them. So I don't want to be on a barricade and need to actuate the laser or the light and have to do this, right? I don't want to have to like break down how I always shoot the gun. Inconsistencies will create imprecision. Is that a word? Imprecision? Or did I just make that up?
Doesn't matter.
I think it kind of does. I think I'm a solid pioneer of that. Imprecision. Put that on a t-shirt. Anyway, so I don't want to violate how I connect to the gun and the consistency with which I connect to the gun. So that's how I set everything up so that I can access it. Good rule of thumb, man, for like bipod placement or something like that. You mount the gun where you're square behind it like you always like to shoot, palm out, and thumb goes underneath it. The bipod goes up against where my thumb is. I can adjust the legs. I can adjust anything on the bipod from prone or from barricaded without having to kind of break down and do that. I can actuate the light without having to break down and do that. That's all pretty important for me. As a general non-negotiable, I don't like anything on the bottom of my rails. I don't like hand stops, finger stops, vert grips, anything. And the reason is, number one, I want to keep this as streamlined as possible for barricades and things like that. I don't want to be running into my stuff if I don't have to. The next thing is, when you start to put stuff on the bottom of the gun, it violates your ability or your desire to be able to access certain barricades the way that you want to. So if we think about car hoods, barricades that have depth to them, three-dimensional things, not necessarily hard edges of wood, right? As opposed to being able to deck the rifle and get maximum surface area contact and stabilize the gun, I end up with the vert grip on a little monopod where I can't really get stable. And I think that what's kind of happened because of that is dudes are starting to kind of ram the gun into things, and as long as I just press into it really hard, it's going to be good for me, right? The issue with that is you may gain stability in the up and down plane, but we create instability with the left and right plane. Also, we just got done talking about input into the rail and how it affects point of impact, and so you can imagine the leverage of a human body laying up into a leverage point that's pulling on the rifle, like it causes shots to go kind of all over the place. So I typically don't like to load the rail if I can help it. So I want to keep the rail clean so that I can access different parts of the barricade how I want to. I also think that the idea of vertical grips, most people like don't understand where that came from. So like back in the day, the early GWAT days when they had those short hand guards and the PEC 2A laser system that looked like a freaking VHS cassette tape on top of the gun. Then I got to put that big Insight flashlight over here, and I got to have my pressure pads and stuff, and I got to have the sling connection points, and they're like, well, where do I put my hand? Well, we'll just stick this big giant thing off the bottom of it. How about there? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. The guns continued to modify, but we kind of never did. The idea that I'm going to hang something off the rail and pull on it, I think is rooted in stopping the gun from moving while I'm shooting. I think that that's not a great idea. I'm always trying to create linear pressure with the barrel back into me, not offline, off axis pressure into me. It causes weird behavior in recoil. So I don't think that most people in the civilized United States need those things on their gun. That will certainly get you a really hot comment section. And it is what it is. You want to put a freaking broomstick hanging off the bottom of your gun, you do your thing, man. I'm sure I don't care. Ain't you real daddy, you can do whatever you want to do. Getting into the attachments that are on the receiver itself, I like big bulky controls. I want controls that I can effectively actuate or manipulate with gloved hands in the dark without seeing them. I think a lot of people see all these big giant things and they're like, oh, that's going to get hung on kit. It's not often, but every now and then when I am in kit, I've never had that happen. I've never had a detriment come from that. It's always just been a benefit, so I don't really worry too much about it. I like bad levers. This one's from Parker Mountain Machine. The Magpul ones are fine. I kind of like Parker Mountain Machine, so I support them by running their stuff. I like this thing a lot. It helps me do a multitude of things. I can lock the gun open the same way that I rack it pretty easily without having to switch hands. I can get a little bit quicker reload out of it with that thing, and I've never had an issue with it at all. You'll see some people that say that bad levers cause NDs. I vehemently disagree, and we'll have that conversation with anybody. The bad lever doesn't cause the ND. Your lack of safing the gun when you don't have the intention to fire it is what caused the ND. I typically like safety selectors that stick off of the gun a little bit. Like, I don't like them really flush with the receiver. So like Badger Ordnance comes to mind. Fantastic safety selector, but I don't like how close to the receiver it sits, because on the way back up to safe, it is possible that like you overrun that and you can kind of slip past it with gloves on and not feel it. So I like big giant safeties that I can manipulate without having to do the pinch motion. So a lot of guys with the little thin ones that go down to 90 degrees, when they're going to safe the gun and move, or safe the gun and do something, you'll see them kind of have to do one of those to get it back on. The problem with that is, from my side of the house, is that's a 1/10, 2/10 of a second that I can't do anything with the support hand because it has to support the gun. So I like to be able to relinquish the support hand and manipulate that if I want to. You know, that's all personal preference. It's not like you're going to be a bad shooter if you don't do that. That's just why I do what I do. I like ambidextrous charging handles. That's pretty important for me so that I get options of how I want to run the gun, which side I want to run the gun from. If I've got a pretty nasty malfunction and I want to pin the gun and grip both sides of it and tear it backwards and try to get that out of there, I can do that. It's pretty easy. Some people are making charging handles, and I think the latches are facing the wrong way. So I think the latches need to face and contour towards the muzzle. That's where I'm trying to hook into that piece of machinery there, right? The ones that go backwards are super weird to me. Imagine trying to hook that, right? Like, you just kind of slide off of it. So I like the flare to be towards the muzzle. As far as buffer tubes and buffer design, again, yield towards the design of the manufacturer. The barrel, what do they say you need to do? You write most of them an email, they'll tell you what they think you need to do, and that's a pretty good way to start. But for the vast majority of guns I have, the A5 system is on there. Butt stocks, I'm pretty partial to butt stocks, so I really like the CTR just as a general rule. It's modular. It has a hole in the middle of it, which I like for bag shooting, prone shooting, things like that, where I can get a hook into that thing and grab hold of it. I like the ability to add different height cheek risers based on what I'm doing, what scope height, optic height I'm using. So most of them, they're real shaky like that. This one has a tensioner so that you can kind of get rid of a lot of that. I like that. Butt stock length, like what should you be doing with that? The answer is not that, right? So I think that grown-ups should not have a gun that looks like that. And that includes even if you're in kit, man. We have ways around that where we don't violate how we need to fit to the gun. What I always tell guys, man, is this thing moves not as like a neat design feature, right? But it moves because it's supposed to move and you're supposed to fit it to you. For the vast majority of people, if you're running just standard carbine length systems, probably all the way out is going to be the general answer for the majority of people that are not afflicted with midget syndrome or, gnome, yard gnome features. How do you know where to put it? The good rule of thumb, man, that we always kind of use, the old shotgun rule, right? The 90-90 rule. So 90 degree elbow, 90 degree arm. I want to be able to access the controls of the weapon and place a 90 degree trigger finger on the face of the trigger. So 90 degrees, the buttstock needs to be touching the crotch of the elbow. This would not be a good thing. And also, if you're all the way out and you're like, I can't do it, that's also not a good thing. So find somewhere where you can access the crotch of the elbow and access the face of the trigger with a 90 degree finger. That's a pretty good place to start. From there, a bump in, a bump out, kind of depending on what you like. What that's going to do for you is it's going to fit the gun to you by way of forces of leverage and how easy it is to make the gun make connection to you. It's also going to put you in the most efficient position to get precision out of from multiple different positions, right? So there's some things when we're doing precision shooting that we don't want to violate. The buttstock being fit to you is going to help with that a lot. Slings are pretty important. You should have one. And I don't think for the vast majority of people it needs to be a single point sling. I also don't think it needs a bungee on it. I like 2-point slings. I don't like anything where I can pull on it and it gets longer or shorter or anything weird like that. I don't like those bungee slings. I want it a 2-point because 2 points creates more stability than single point. Single point, it kind of turns into like a Little Wayne charm, right? Like it's just kind of floating around on the necklace. It's unpredictable where the rifle's going to be when you need it. It's also unpredictable where the muzzle's going to be with other people around you. As far as the connection points, I like all the way to the front, all the way to the rear. That's just for stability purposes and how I will run a gun on a barricade and connect to the sling to the barricade. It's just my preference. I don't get too wrapped around the axle about where you want to put it. I think that the adjustment tab is a pretty important feature. I think the adjustment tab needs to be made of a different material than the actual sling itself, so that with gloved hands under nods, something weird where you can't see it, you absolutely know when you've grabbed the adjustment tab versus you haven't. The other big thing that a lot of dudes kind of overlook, at minimum, I require a QD attachment point on one part of the sling, right? So whether it be at the front, the back, or both, QD attachment points are non-negotiable for me. There's lots of people that are no longer with us because they couldn't get out of their gun. So I want to be able to get out of this thing if I want to. Got a little mag flare on there that I'm trying that. I don't necessarily believe in that or think everybody needs one. I'm trying it since I went to the bad lever a few months back to see kind of what it does for me, what it doesn't do. But this is more of a test bed for parts and accessories more than anything. So that's why it's on there. So optics are an interesting animal because everybody thinks that they're right. I think a lot of people, based on their own subjective opinion and the application of what they're doing, they probably are right. But I think more often than not, we see people that are pretty generally confused about why they've chosen the optic that they've chosen. So I'm a big believer in the simplicity of a red dot system. I think that it's a very easy system to understand. It's a very easy system to deal with without having to understand a lot of the intricacies that come with multiple lenses, reticles, turrets, and multiple attachment methods to be able to secure a scope or something like that to a gun. I certainly do treat the red dot optic the same way I treat the precision optic, meaning I'm very intentional about how I mount it. I mount it a very specific way for very specific reasons. I do quite a few things that I don't think many people do. You know, you hear about people that they lose zero a lot. They take a rifle, they zero it, they throw it in the back of a truck, and then the next day they have to re-zero the gun because it's lost zero. I never really lose zero, and I think it's because of how I mount the optic. I like magnification capability on board if needed. I don't want it to be built into the system though, and the reason is when you have an optic that has its purpose built as one singular unit, you don't get the option or the benefit of being able to choose anything other than that, right? So looking through a tube that is, you know, 8 inches long at a 1x setting, attempting to run it like a red dot, there's absolutely some detriment that comes with that that's not there when we just have a little short window. I like the ability to just have a true 1x image of a short dot. It works out really good for me for transitions and kind of tracking the dot on presentations and indexes. Really good for austere positions, if you will, where you can't make good connection to the rifle. So you know, I want to shoot like this, but I find myself having to kind of shoot like this. This is way easier to kind of see the dot from no matter where your face is if you had to shoot, compared to like a scope where you've got the eye box you have to be in. The magnifier and its placement is a pretty important part of this. So I don't really get super into what magnifier people use. I do believe that the EOTech G33 is the best visual that's available. The downside of it is that they come with the turrets that stick way up, and the turrets are there to move the image to the center of the magnifier, and those can get rolled very, very easily. So I use a HRF concept shroud to kind of protect those and keep that from happening. That's the only real downside to the EOTech magnifiers, is those turrets being exposed and so easily movable. When it comes to where to put the magnifier, so this is an interesting one. What we typically see is a lot of people running magnifiers somewhere that looks something like that. I think that they're doing that because the eye relief on magnifiers basically sucks, right? Like we said, we wanted a magnified optic that's really, really short and really compact. With that, there are some challenges that you just can't overcome, right? So we end up with a really, really short eye relief by default, just based on science and light. People will pull that all the way back in order to gain that full field of view, and now the problem is they've kind of violated how they like to run the gun. So like, I can't really get in there anymore. If this is not deployed, I can't really get in there anymore. So I've kind of eliminated my ability to access very quickly what I want to do to work the gun. I've removed my ability to place a rear iron sight where I want to, if I want to use an iron sight. I'm not willing to do that. I also don't believe that scope shadow with a magnifier is a bad thing. I actually think it's a tremendous plus. So what I will do is I'll push it far enough forward so that I get scope shadow. I've now cleared up any potential issues with operating the gun, and when I deploy it, I get a lot of scope shadow coming through the optic. What I do is I take the reticle, dot, whatever it is, and the target, and I put it in the center of that black donut, and as long as that black donut is concentric and it's not bleeding over farther from one side or the other, I know that I'm in the same place behind the optic every time, which becomes tremendously important when it comes to dots and magnifiers. Dots and magnifiers are very prone to parallax issues and visual issues that other scopes are not, just because they're two separate systems, oftentimes that were not made to be conjoined with each other, right? SIG, dot, EOTech, magnifier. So there's a number of things that exist in the world of dots and magnifiers that people struggle with, like magnifier shift, where I deploy the magnifier in my group shifts. I don't believe in magnifier shift. I don't think it's real. I think that what happens is people deploy the magnifier and they change how they're on the gun. So we very commonly commonly see guys that will shoot a rifle like this, and then they go to deploy the magnifier, and they'll do something that looks like that. And then their groups change, right? And it's like, well, yeah, because you changed the way you were doing it, and precision requires consistency, and you've just violated consistency. So that's what's happening. Or the image that they think they see is not actually what they see because they don't have the system set up correctly to be able to mitigate that. As far as the height of the optic, I'm not a high mount hater. Well, I hate them. I don't hate you if you don't hate them, right? You do whatever you want to do, but I think that most people don't understand the potential detriment that comes with raising the optic way, 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 way up. If you're gonna raise the optic way up, one of the things I value and is a non-negotiable thing for me is the connection to the buttstock and the cheek. So when I mount the gun, I want a solid connection into the shoulder pocket, and the way that I put my shoulder, it takes the cheek piece and it drives it into my face, and so I create a band of pressure that exists between those 2 points that stabilizes the back of the gun really good. Also, the cheek piece becomes the really only metric that I have to consistently put my eyeball in the same place behind the optic every time. So if I'm gonna raise the optic height, the cheek's coming with it. This is a 1.7 height optic, or classically known as a lower 1/3, because I raised it from a 1.54 to a 1.70. I brought the cheek up a 1/4 inch to kind of meet it there. It's not that everybody needs to do this. Everybody's face is a little bit different, right? But the really easy way to know whether or not you might need a cheek riser is if you mount the gun with your eyes closed, just like you always like to shoot it, and you open your eyes. If you don't see a dot in the center of the screen, you probably need to bring the cheek piece up. Most people will submarine below the center line of the optic, and what they end up doing to accommodate for that is holding their head up and getting more of like a jaw weld. That's significantly less stable than being connected to it here. Also, you got a floating head that has no real point of reference of where it needs to be, so it kind of just floats around. And if it floats around, what you see changes based on the angle that light is coming through those parabolic lenses known as parallax. I'm pretty big on that, and pretty big on keeping the optics as low as I can to get what I need to get done. I also have found very, very, very minimal contexts where raising the optic height up really, really high is really benefiting people. I think they have a perception that it might be benefiting them, but I don't think they understand how it's also a detriment. So like my little rule of thumb, my little trademark phrase, right, if you will, is if raising the optic height does not directly solve a problem that you have, it is damn sure to create one, and your awareness of that problem is not a requirement for that problem to exist, right? Maybe just the environment that you shoot in, or the standard that you're holding, is not in sync with what's needed to see that detriment. I think a lot of people with super, super high optics, you know, thinking about like the Hydra mounts and the Night Force, like really crazy high optic skyscraper mount, I think that the majority of those guys are not shooting rifles at rifle distances or at rifle targets. I think that they're shooting rifles at pistol distances and pistol targets, meaning if all you ever do is live life at 7 yards and in with a rifle, you can basically be all goofed up and still look pretty good, right? Like you don't really see a detriment. But when we start to back up to 60 and 70 yards and try to shoot rifles standing unsupported really aggressively, some weird stuff starts to happen. When we introduce barricades and higher precision shots, some weird stuff starts to happen. So as a general rule, I just kind of avoid it. But again, do you, man. Outside of that, what else you got? That's it? That's it then. What'd you think? Tremendously informative and entertaining?
Yes.
Thanks, Jeff.
The most entertaining and informative
probably ever.
Ever.
Maybe ever.
all
Yep.
time.